Okay, hi everyone. I'm back today with a movie review, but it's a little bit different. In Australia right now, and probably all over the world, I think on Amazon Prime and BBC in the UK, there's a reimagining of one of the most famous Australian films ever, A Picnic at Hanging Rock, which came out in 1975. And I just watched the first episode last night and it's intriguing. I don't want to prejudge it because it's one episode. I think there are 6. But it made me want to watch the original Peter Weir film and just go through whether it matched my memory of it, because I saw it as an 11-year-old in a cinema and found it incredibly disturbing. So we're going to do our usual thing, although it's a little bit weird for a film which is almost 50 years old. And that is, should you go see it? Well, it doesn't quite work. So I do think everyone should see it who's into cinema, and especially if you're an Australian, because it's just a landmark film. So I would say if you're going to watch the miniseries, maybe before you watch the miniseries, watch the film, or finish the miniseries and go back. But I'm going to talk about it in the next phase, and then tons in spoilers, and also a lot about the book and the tragedy all around this. And there's some big spoilers which I'll let you know at the end part. So we'll have a break and I'll be back in a second. Okay, so Picnic at Hanging Rock came out in 1975 and directed by Peter Weir, who went on to be a legendary kind of director both in Australia but also overseas. Dead Poets Society, The Truman Show, Witness, like a real heavy hitter. But in 1975 he'd done a couple of student-y kind of films. He'd done a weird film called The Cars That Ate Paris, which is quite surreal, Paris being like an outback little town. And then he stepped up to the plate and did Picnic at Hanging Rock. So it was a weird time, 75. In 1972, we had elected in Australia a left-wing government for the first time in about 20 years. And whatever your politics, one of the things they said was, we're going to start telling Australian stories by Australians. And so they set up a lot of film financing, some of it state government. And one of the films which came out of it was Picnic at Hanging Rock. And what that allowed Australians to do was, all of a sudden all these actors got jobs, all these cinematographers and directors were able to really show their skills both within Australia and internationally. And Picnic at Hanging Rock was one of the first films which people knew overseas and was shown all across America and I think at Cannes and various film festivals. So the film is quite famous for, it opens with, and I can't remember the exact words, but a typographic, something like, on St. Valentine's Day, 1900, 4 girls go missing at Hanging Rock in Victoria. So the story is essentially about this picnic at Hanging Rock in which these girls go missing, but it's really set, the vast amount of the film is set at Appleyards College for Girls, in which you have numerous girls there who are, it's kind of like a finishing school. 1900, it's a weird time in America, in Australia. We haven't even gone through federation. There aren't even, a country of Australia. And you've got these little places like this, which mainly are benefiting from gold rushes, and especially in Victoria. So you have these pockets of wealth and they're sending their daughters to this place to be educated as young ladies. So one of the things about this film is it is what we call Australian Gothic, and it is one of the first films which reflects that the white settlement has come to a very ancient civilization, an ancient continent, and the stress between those white settlers and just the age of the place, and how there might be secrets to the outback which we are just never going to know about and aren't privy to, and that the Aborigines do have, although that's not a big element in this film. Interestingly enough, the best two Australian Gothic films for a long time were Picnic at Hanging Rock, followed straight away by Peter Weir's The Last Wave, which I love, which is also about white Australians dealing with the mythology of this country. So there's this tension constantly throughout this film about what these girls are, that they look out of place in the outback, that it's constantly stressed how dangerous the outback is. Poisonous snakes and lizards and the heat, and that you could go missing. Everyone is scared of the bush and what it represents. So that's the setting. Now, one of the things that you forget if you haven't seen it, and it caught me a little bit by surprise, is that about the first 40, 50 minutes, by that point, the girls are gone. And and then the rest of the film unpicks what has just occurred. So it's very interesting that my memory would have been that there was more of the other part of the film, and then we got to that near the end maybe, or at least at the end of the second act. But that's not true. It's really the end of the first act. So it's funny how your memory kind of plays these little tricks. So we should, Peter Weir is brilliant in directing this in this ethereal, dreamy kind of way, which has become, legendary. So, but really that was down to Russell Boyd. Russell Boyd was a cinematographer who also went on to have a storied career. And he did a couple of interesting things. One was he took the painters of the Australian Impressionist movement, and the most famous inspiration for him was Frederick McCubbin, who has painted this series of paintings which have this kind of, like Impressionism, but a little bit of a dreamy kind of texture to it, but there's always a note of danger in it. And his most famous painting is Lost. And one of the greatest fears, even today, to Australians is that you could get lost in the bush. And everyone, when they go in the bush, you take extra water, and now you take GPS and stuff. But you can imagine in the 1900s, for settlers, and people were still going out and establishing homesteads and stuff, that was an incredible fear for them. And so he has used that quality to and some of the tricks he used was, instead of just filming straight on, he would put a slight, like a bridal veil over the camera. And it's as if you're shooting from a different viewpoint, a non-terrestrial viewpoint, that almost there's someone observing these girls, and especially at the picnic stage, and observing them from a different viewpoint. And we'll talk about that more in spoilers, but it means that even if you just watch the first 40 minutes, you would go, wow, this is a very strange and evocative effect that he has achieved. And then on top of that is the score. Now, I'm not a huge music guy, and I couldn't name any other film which uses pan flutes, but the moment you hear that score, you could be in a supermarket or something, you hear that score, you go, that's Picnic at Hanging Rock. You just know it straight away. And it really, there's a little bit of the H.P. Lovecraft to it as well. If you've ever read Lovecraft, he often says that it goes back to the ancient Greek bacchanalias, where they'd play pan flutes and then some horrific things would occur, that it's a primal kind of instrument. So you've got all this incredible beauty cinematically, and then on top of it, some really good acting and some young actors. So the two I'll straight away talk about are John Jarratt and Jackie Weaver. And the reason why I'm picking those two is they must have been, 19 or 20 years old, and they're still working today. And Jackie Weaver was nominated for an Academy Award just 2 years ago. So, and John Jarratt is famously, the horrible serial killer in Wolf Creek, which is again about fear of the outback. So he's really gone the whole transition over his career. But you also, Helen Morse, did really well with that role. She played, and I'll just check the name, the French teacher, and I think it's Mademoiselle Depoitier. And she got numerous awards all across the world for her performance, which is very drawn back and really fitted the film. And of course, but the most famous person probably, well, there's two. There's Miranda, who's kind of the lead girl, and she's played by Anne-Louise Lambert, who's now, I think, a child psychologist or like a life coach or something. But she's still been doing acting, and she's stunningly gorgeous. But there is definitely an ineffable quality to her performance, so that when people look at her, they always talk about her as a Botticelli's Angels or something like that, and she does look otherworldly. And of course, she's famous because when she's going up into the hanging rock, someone calls out Miranda. And even now today, if you go to Hanging Rock, people take photos of themselves and videos of them yelling out Miranda. So, but the performance I always remembered the most of all was Rachel Roberts as the headmistress, and she's got this incredible big wig and very stern woman, and over the film you can see she starts really quite dapper and tied up, and over the film she completely decomposes. Her hair starts coming out and all that. It's really, really good acting. Now, I think that's enough for we're going to go into spoilers, so if you haven't seen the film or if you don't know much about it, probably see the film first or watch the mini-series. But for most people, I think they know the story. But I've done a little bit of research, and I'll take you through actually what supposedly does happen at the end, and also some of the gossip around the film itself. Okay, I'll be back in a second. Okay, so let's now talk about the film in a little bit more detail. One of the interesting things is the film has this kind of weird sexual hysteria just underneath this, possible lesbian kind of affair going on. And again, it gets back to this Australian Gothic thing of that the settlers are really keeping everything under wraps, whether it be their sexuality, whether it be, they're scared to go out into the bush. So there's this nice underlying tension which you're just never quite sure what is happening. But it's not the major theme. The major theme is the ancient horror of it. And famously, when the movie was released around the world, Americans especially were furious because the film ends and doesn't explain what happened. And they just said, where's the ending? You can't have a mystery and not have the ending. Whereas Australians were a little bit more, well, yeah, stuff could happen in the bush, and that might be it. Now, I have a confession to make. I saw this as an 11-year-old, and I believed this was completely true. I did not understand what was happening. I was a bit confused. And it wasn't until I was a grown man that someone told me, or I read an article or something, that I realized it had never happened. It was a fictional thing. And the reason why is because at the beginning of the film, it does look like a true story. And in the book, there's Joan Lindsay, who wrote it, puts like a pseudo-historical thing that soon after the events, the police station burned down and everyone died. And she always acted like, well, maybe it did happen. But people have looked into it, obviously, and it never occurred. But there was this thing definitely in Australia that even today, people go, oh, maybe it did occur. Or if it didn't occur, something like that. And that carries a lot of weight. And so about a couple of years ago now, there was a big controversy because supposedly someone found Joan Lindsay's, well, I should go back. When Joan Lindsay published the book that the film is based on, supposedly it had a famous 18th chapter which explained the ending. And it was always taught after that in editorial and book circles that this was great editing, that they took that chapter out so no one was sure and everyone kept talking about it, and it was this mystery which stayed with people. So not that long ago, about 10 years ago, someone published that 18th chapter. And even today there was a bit, did Joan Lindsay actually write it, or did someone see like a marketing opportunity and wrote it, maybe based on her papers or whatever. So no one's quite sure what happened, but it was published. And in that, Joan Lindsay is quite clear that what happens to the girls is they go through time warp and shrink down very small, almost like ants, like they see the world shrinking. And so that fits with, in the movie, you'll see everyone's watch stops at 12 o'clock when they're at the rock. Plus also, there's lots of clocks everywhere and they're always chiming and they seem to represent danger. And so that kind of fits with one of the themes of the book. The other thing which happens in this famous 18th chapter is some of the girls are turned into animals, which is, again, this, tip of the hat to Aboriginal mythology, which is a constant theme, that, humans turning into animals and back. So, it's an interesting thing that she does see very clearly that the girls are almost still there, but they're, like a bubble universe. And that there's something about that place which has allowed this to happen. So that was the mystery of it. It's not really explained in the film. You kind of have to work it out a little bit. And one other interesting thing was in the movie and in the book, one of the girls commits suicide because she's being punished by everyone, and she was, in love with Miranda. And it's implied that Mrs. Appleyard, played by Rachel Roberts, has killed her by pushing her through glass. Now, in real life, the actress who played Mrs. Appleyard, Rachel Roberts, she was married to Rex Harrison, and he divorced her, and she was desperate to get back to, she tried to get back to him, and he said no. And eventually she poisoned herself and ran through a glass door and killed herself horribly. And really kind of a bit of a mirror to her character, because famously, of course, the last part of Hanging Rock is they find her body at the bottom of the rock. So when I found that out, I really, felt a bit sad, that it would mirror in any kind of way to this horrible kind of mystery. That's it for today. I hope you enjoy that. What I plan to do is, if you enjoy this, when the new mini-series comes out and finishes its run, I'm going to review that, and then we can compare and contrast this landmark film with the new reimagining. So that's it for today. If you like what I'm doing, subscribe, hit like, hit the bell so you always know when I'm doing new stuff. And I'm on Twitter at Guru Eden, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.